right, I'm glad you are still with us. You're watching Kivumbi 2017, and the conversation here is heating up. I can't wait for us to get into the thick of things with my guests tonight. We've had such a fascinating conversation about where our politics is and what the foundation of it is. But before we get into that conversation, let's touch base once again with how the ballot is going in the city centre with Lofty Matambo. So, Lofty, are we set for another round of voting? When does that begin?
Yes, Yvonne, thank you very much. Kuna msemo wa Kiswahili Yvonne unasema mtu ni utu si kitu. Lakini hapa kuna wengine wamesema hata huyo mtu bila kitu si mtu. Kwa hivyo kuna wale ambao wamepigia pesa kwamba wasipopewa pesa basi hawatapigia kura. Kwa hivyo kura zinaendelea na hadi kwenda mapumzikoni Yvonne, integrity ukipenda maadili yalikuwa yanaongoza kwa kura 73 na pesa zilikuwa zinaongoza kwa kura 13 Yvonne.
All right, thanks for that, Lofty. Okay, so 73% say they will vote on the basis of integrity. Well, if that's a true reflection or not, we'll definitely come back and touch base with you as the voting continues. So here we are in studio once again with my guests this evening. Like I promised you, we have details from a survey that was done by the Jesuit Hakimani Center. We'll be telling you about that in just a short while. But Gadara, is that a true reflection? 73% of the people who voted in the city centre on Kivumbi 2017 say it will be on the basis of integrity.
I think there's a sense in which when you put a camera there, people will vote according to what they think is respectable, but not necessarily what
yeah, we saw someone who talked about tribe but couldn't defend.
Yeah, but think about it as in, if 73% of Kenyans think integrity is a big deal, why do we end up with the politicians that we have? You know, I think in a sense it's a bit mistaken. My view is that there are two levels. Integrity does matter to people, but it matters much closer to home than it does when it comes to political office.
Right.
Because our politics and our governance is divorced, is removed from the people. You know, so people go, we send people to get something called a national cake, to join something called this government thing that is really not reflective of us. I find it interesting that you've got the four things that are all about what the leaders are, not about what the voters want.
Okay, so let's speak about what the voters want, and that is issues, yes?
Right.
So there's that data that's running on your screen, so let's talk a little bit about it. It was done by the Jesuit Hakimani Center. The title of that research is Election Agenda 2017 and Beyond, Election Issueification, and whether issues really matter. So as you can see from some of the data that's running there, 88.3% say they see no connection between elections and issues. As we take a look at political accountability, for example, just 4.5% of those who were surveyed thought politicians are serious about their responsibilities. Another 22.9% said politicians follow the agenda set by citizens. Here's a good one, because I know you were asking about whether issues really matter. As for corruption, which is all about integrity, 85% think corruption won't end soon, which is probably why they say, okay, you know what, just give me my money now and then you can go and do what you want over the next 5 years. And then here's another one, public participation. 14.8% of those who were surveyed find value in public participation. 19.7% think they are responsible for electing credible leaders. And 21.1% found the urgency of addressing corruption a big one. So this is from the Jesuit Hakimani Center. And that study was done, you know, I think about a month or two ago. So, Martin, let's talk a little bit about this. So, over 88% do not see a connection between issues and the election. So, hence, they're voting for on the basis of
You see, a voter
money.
is a very interesting person. And I think that percentage is correct. Because in Kenya, we do not vote issues, that's a fact. But we vote depending on what our interests are and depending on what our circumstances are. So if we are hungry, we are looking for somebody who can talk about food. If we have no money, we are looking for somebody who can tell us about...
But food is an issue, though, isn't it?
But
So why doesn't that...
Food is not an issue. It's not an issue at a national level if you look at it from a political perspective.
Okay,
Because it's one thing for me to tell you that unga will come down to 90. The point is, how will I sustain that? What policies am I putting in place to ensure that that happens? So we are not there. And I can come today and tell you, look, this will happen, and tomorrow I can change my story and tell you that will happen.
Yeah.
So to that extent, issues don't drive our politics. But our interests, our tribal affiliations, and our sense of entitlement, wanting to say that it's our turn to also take on the state apparatus or the national cake, as Gadara says, that is what drives us.
But Martin,
that's what drives our
coalitions.
coalitions.
How many people actually benefit from your leader being in power? I mean, to be honest, I think there have been leaders who are of my tribe. I don't think my life has changed significantly, even by a breath.
And that's right, in the sense that...
So why do we keep voting on
yes,
this basis when we know it doesn't benefit us?
There is a connection between our state and how we play our politics. If you're in a hopeless state, what does it matter? Give me 200 bob today to Achane, so that you go do your thing, I'll do my thing, we'll meet again after 5 years. And that is what happens. So our leaders are not accountable, they're not held to account, because A, they simply are not people who are elected to serve.
Or your contract with the elected leader ended, yeah? It was here, it's 200 for your vote, transaction finished.
Finished. So to that extent, you are right in the sense that we are looking at our circumstances. And let me say that the voter is not just a Kenyan voter who behaves like that. Look at the American voter. With all the issues that Trump faced, even issues of racism, bigotry, you know, they still elected him. And those who believe in him, even with the news scandals that are happening around, they really don't care. They're saying, look, we want jobs.
Fake news.
Whatever that means.
Fake media.
Fake news, whatever it is. So an electorate depends, I mean, a lot of times what an electorate does depends on what their circumstances are. There was a time when the Americans just wanted change for the sake of it. They didn't care who was coming in. He could have promised them anything, he did.
Was that Barack Obama's time?
No, Barack, again, that was, no, I'm talking about Trump. Because Trump simply, at that point of Trump, people were tired with Washington, and what Clinton really represented was the same.
Right.
So really, there was nothing changing because of that.
Do you know what, I think first, it's part of the problem is how we define things. I think when we speak of issues, we really need to narrow down to what we mean. And I think issues mean, do people vote according to their problems? And do they think that politics will solve their problems? And that, to me, points out the fundamental problem we have, is that we've got a system of governance that is not predicated on solving people's problems. And people recognize this. They know, if I vote these guys, they're not going to come and fix my issues. You know, that's why you hear 88 say it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. There's no connection between elections and issues. But you paint an interesting picture about our problems and who's going to solve them. And, you know, when we passed the Constitution in 2010, we decided that people who can solve our problems are people who are educated. You laugh. I want to ask the academician in the room. We decided about this, but then again, like, there's just been an overwhelming, then there was a rush for degrees and education. Does that matter anymore? You know, those who are not so educated, you see them teaming up with running mates who are supposedly more educated. Whatever happened to education? We said we wanted this, we said we wanted people who have degrees and that sort of thing. Does that matter anymore? Were we mistaken?
I think, you know, leadership is one of these very complicated, loose, ill-defined connotations of sociology.
But we made it simple.
Of social sciences. I think part of it is because, you know, if you look at, you know, people are leaders, from a football captain to a vicar in a church to a president to a CEO of a company.
Right.
Now the question is, what are the parameters across all these diverse spaces of leadership? And then what is required to deliver? And I think what we don't realize is that there's 3 dimensions to leadership. One is there's the leader, who is the influencer, and then there is the people who follow. Then there is a functional relationship between these 2 people. So like, for instance, what do people look for in a leader? They want somebody who speaks about their issues, somebody who makes them feel comfortable. And in many cases, it could be somebody they're affiliated with by ethnicity.
Okay.
Could be somebody who basically promises them something. So that relationship is the one that we normally ignore. And I think it helps that we understand when somebody says that Sonko is my leader, what are they talking about? What is the relationship
can
between
relate.
them and him?
Okay.
And even today, you had Ruto on their way to present their papers saying that Sonko is the only one who identifies with the problems of Wananchi. So how has that relationship been created? How is that? What is the functional relationship between these two people? But the other point also is that the way that our politics have been structured, it is very difficult for us to lay out some firm foundations of conception around the elements that determine the structure of our politics. Because it is easy to mobilize ethnically. Look at Kenyatta. He's a Kikuyu. Odinga, he's a Luo. Kalonzo, he's a Kamba. When they come at the table, they come with this big army of their ethnic crew.
Okay.
So that it doesn't matter what else they can do, the base is that they can influence these people.
We made it simple though, didn't we? We said we want a governor with a degree. We said we want an MP with a degree. Are we now saying that that is not what defines leadership and that Kenyans won't be looking for that 70 days from today?
Well, again, what I would say is we are mixing up issues.
Yeah.
You know, what Kenyans will look for,
Yeah.
you know, and what
Or
the
are
constitution
looking for.
defines
Okay.
might be two different things. And the second thing is, I think also the sort of rush to put in these educational qualifications was predicated on a wrong assumption and an ignorance of history. The people who stole from us from the 60s, 70s, 80s were people with degrees, were some of the guys who were the first ones
Yeah, but I
in
think
the country. In fact,
but didn't we also want somebody that
educated.
understands how money works and can make priorities? Who can basically be a
obviously,
CEO?
I mean, many
Is that
thieves
not-
know how money works.
Yvonne,
You know,
Yvonne, there is
Fair
a
point.
there is a separation
point.
here. There is an aspiration which we all are aspiring to, and we put in very good things in our constitution. Those are aspirations. We think that people with an education will make
Yeah.
better leaders.
Right.
We think that people with integrity will make better leaders. We think that we need separation of powers and so on. Those are good things. We think about it. But there's an extent to which you can ask, to what extent is the current constitution really a Kenyan document? Or is it, I mean, and when I say Kenyan, is in terms of the majority of Kenyans. Do they believe in
But the
it? Do
majority
they relate
voted
to it?
for this.
Voting is one thing, but who sold it to them? Remember, there are people who say
Okay.
that if so-and-so has read it,
All right.
it is
Okay.
good. So there is a way in which there's a disconnect between ourselves and our constitution, our aspirations and our reality. Now, if you talk about values, as you see people voting, so what's the difference? What is the offer on governorship in Nairobi? What's the offer on governorship in Kiambu? What's the offer on governorship in Mombasa? What's the offer on governorship in Kirinyaga or indeed Kajiado? Certainly integrity is not one of them. In fact, if anything, anybody who was ever accused or who had an issue around integrity is very much actively back on the ballot.
yeah, but the thing is, this, I mean, you speak about the constitution being divorced. I would say the entire state is what is divorced. This state was imposed. It was imposed on these people by the British. It was brought in.
No.
And actually, let me finish. No, understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we inherited it. And we have not fundamentally reformed it. That was what the TJRC report told us. We have not reformed
You know,
the state.
who should
it is
reform
not
the state?
still a state that is representative of the people
Who should reform
it
the state?
governs over. You know,
Okay, so who should
Who should
reform
reform
the
the
state?
state?
That's a good question.
You see, the basic assumption is
Yeah.
this, and this is why, again, political science is very clear. That in the state of nature, people are unsafe and insecure. But they form a social contract in order for them to come and establish some order to themselves. So it's only the people of Kenya who can decide what kind of state they want and what kind of leaders they want. And as long as we have the leaders we have, please let's understand
as
these are
long
the
as we
people
have
that
the
Kenyans
state
want.
we
Alright.
have that
So-
stops us having that discussion. I mean, you cannot
but-
really
okay.
argue that the government of Kenya came from
All right. So
Kenyans
allow
who
me
are
to
in
ask
a
this
state
question,
of nature.
Gadara.
Where did it
Of
come
course
from?
not.
Allow me
It
to
was
ask this
imposed
question,
on us.
Gadara,
By
then.
who? By the British.
50 years ago?
No,
70 years
actually
ago?
100 years ago.
So isn't this a robust conversation? But then here's the thing. So who reforms the state? Is it the voters? And Alex, then the question is, are voters, I asked this earlier, Are they accomplices or are they victims in this process? Because what we seem to be saying is there's this whole divorce between statehood and the citizens and the Constitution and the citizens. But it was assumed that this is that moment when citizens take up that role and say, no, no more. This is what we're going to decide based on it. So are citizens perpetuating what Gadara is talking about? And are we all just part of this dark system that is in elections the opportunity to change something?
Well, I think, democracy across the world, if you look at the United States, the emergence of Trump, if you look at Brexit, if you look at the near-death situation in France.
Near-death
democracy
situation.
is really complicated. It is so complex. The process of the whole process of identifying, of deciding, of making many evaluations and assessment to end up to find someone who can lead is very difficult. So usually it really is how charismatic, populist the candidates are. They kind of whip and create a certain amount of following, like what Trump did. He basically played to the base of the United States at that time, which was the Rust Belt, the Appalachia and all these places. Jobs were going, China, Mexico. You find a strawman. In the Kenyan political system too, we've always found a strawman. Raila will find his strawman, Uhuru will find his strawman across the world. So it is this demagoguery that actually is the biggest threat to this whole construction around democracy. And sometimes you wonder whether citizens are sophisticated enough to sift through this complex.
And they are.
Okay, now
I actually find the leaders who can actually...
Trump is not a creation from nowhere. It's the citizens who have created him. His presidency comes from a base, comes from a support base.
Okay, so can
our leaders come from a base, so they're not from nowhere.
So let me ask this question because
exactly. That's what we need to
we had a
know.
sort of similar conversation last night on Checkpoint, and we're asking. So you were saying perhaps the voters aren't as sophisticated. I remember Kamodo Waiganjo saying, "Give the voters a little more credit."
Should
we or?
Well, again,
I don't know.
I always say I think the voters and their behavior is governed and is directed by the system they find themselves in, the system they have to navigate.
So who changes the system,
how they change it,
how do we change it?
that question, in fact, you asked it, who changes it?
Yeah.
I think the people do change it, but we've got to recognize that there's already a system there and people who are invested in keeping it that way. That is why when people go out and demonstrate for change, they find police. That's why they're beaten out. Because there's a system. There are people who benefit from this. And they want to keep it that way. When we wanted to change it, when the British were running it, and we wanted to change it, do you think they just stood up and said, yes,
Yvonne, I can't let Gadara get away with this British thing.
Okay, Martin.
2002, when Kenyans were voting in Kibaki and voting in NAC, when Kenyans were arresting policemen who were taking bribes, were those
of course,
strangers?
Those Kenyans.
Yeah.
What happened in 2003
precisely
when Kibaki sent GSU into Bomas? What do you think he was doing?
No, Gadara,
he was shutting you down.
Gadara, you can't come and say that systems and the system is the one that blocking.
People
have the power. And they have expressed it at different times. And they continue to do, just like in
do
this
election. Do you remember Code Demos when they tried to express themselves?
All right, okay.
What happened?
You know what? Let me put it this way. We seem to be saying that the voters have no say. It's the system. That's the sense I'm getting from what you are saying.
What I'm saying
I guess it is the choices that they're
it
presented. Like, for instance, you have Mr. Odinga.
So can we have a protest vote where people just don't?
You have in here
don't go to
in
the
Nairobi.
ballot?
Yvonne, we can't take away from the fact that a voter in Kenya will decide who rules this country on August.
Okay.
And that
but
is
I'd like Alex to
even that
finish.
is questionable.
Even
that is questionable.
I'd like Alex to finish his point.
I mean, do you remember what's his name? S.K. Masharia went to the Senate and said he's got evidence that in the elections we've run since 1992, only one election has the person who got the most votes actually been declared president.
Hang on a second,
when you say the voter then is the one who decides, that's questionable.
Even that's an election.
So hang on, gentlemen. Let's let Alex weigh in, because are we then helpless in terms of deciding who goes in there and why? So we say we want somebody with education, we want somebody with wealth. And by the way, we talk about wealth and we say this guy has money, so he will not steal. Well, I think we've learned quite a big lesson on that.
I think it is out of frustration. What we've been trying to do is to create the parameters around leadership.
Yeah.
That's what the constitutional document does, Chapter 6, and all of these things.
Yeah.
That's where we go to things like levels of education. For this kind of leadership level, you need
Yeah.
this amount of education, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. I think it is our attempt, it's a struggle that we have. I think and it's a genuine struggle. And I think, as Gadara said, I agree. We're trying to remodel the logic of state in terms of its relationship with the people. And basically saying, can we give the people more power? Can the president be subordinate to the will of the people? And that's what we've tried to do with trying to erode the powers of the president, trying to create things like devolution. It is a constant quest. And as Martin said, the citizens continually express that aspiration to basically rein in the political class and impose their will on how they want to be governed.
Okay.
Now, the problem is that at certain points, the state goes back to claw those privileges back.
All right,
And I think
so
it is
hold
that
that thought.
vigilance that is critical. And how do we safeguard those constitutional rights?
Let's say just
Absolutely.
one thing.
We wanna
there's
go to the voting, yes, quickly.
Just very, very quickly. The privileging of elections as the fora where we decide issues is, I think, itself problematic. That it should be the participation that people have throughout the election. Throughout the 5 years.
5-year period.
And that what defines a democracy isn't the fact that you
Hold that thought.
vote, but the fact that you actually participate in the decisions that are made.
Hold that thought,
throughout.
Gadara. Public participation is an interesting one we will come to, and whether then that sort of decides the leaders that we have throughout, or does indeed make a difference from one election cycle to the next. We'll be discussing that a little bit. But so we're speaking about people and the vote. So let's go to where the people are actually voting on these issues. And Lofty Matambo is, of course, in the city centre, still with the voting. Lofty, what are the latest numbers? I know you're there with Zubeida as well. So what are the latest numbers? Do these issues matter? You've heard a bit of the discussion we're having here. Are those voters who are with you, voters empowered?
Yes, Yvonne, thank you very much. Gauging leadership. And here on the streets, we are gauging leadership by asking, what are you going to vote come August 8th this year? Now, hapa Yvonne, labda ni mtaarifu tu kidogo mtazamaji kwamba kituo hiki cha kupigia kura kimefunguliwa mapema mida ya saa 12 na vifaa vya kupigia kura vimefika hapa mida ya 11, vikaongezwa na msimamizi wa kituo hiki Levis Msumba, ambaye amevileta maboksi ya kupigia kura pamoja na makaratasi ya kupigia kura. Na hadi sasa kigezo cha integrity ama maadili kinaongoza kwa zaidi ya kura 100, lakini ningeomba wasimamizi wangu wa kupiga kura Dennis pamoja na Levis wataendelea kutuhesabia, tuangalie manake pia kura za pesa zilizopigwa kwa kigezo cha pesa katika hali ya kuuliza ile swali pamoja na kabila zimepigwa kwa wingi sana katika kipindi cha dakika 10 zilizopita. Wacha watu hesabie, alafu tutajua ziko namna gani. Lakini kunaye bwana ambaye amepingana na mwenzake hapa kuhusiana na maadili na pesa. Yuko hapa atazungumza nasi. Cha kuripoti tu ni kwamba kumekuwa na mshike kidogo hapa. Kuna bwana mmoja ambaye ameshikwa na kura 10 za pesa, ambaye alitaka kuiba kura na kutaka kutumbukiza katika sanduku la pesa na akafurushwa na wenzake, kwa maana wapiga kura hapo wamesema hawataruhusu wizi wa kura katika kura hizi. Mnasema hamtaki? Hamtaki wizi wa kura.
Hatutaki maneno ya hadharakanithi tena.
Asante sana. Naam. Nitazungumza na mmoja Yvonne, alafu niregeshe kwako katika muda mfupi. Jina lako aitwa nani?
My name is David Odhiambo.
David Odhiambo.
Yes, that is my name.
You voted for integrity.
Yes, I voted for integrity
And,
for a number of reasons.
For a number of reasons.
Yes.
2 reasons kindly.
When you talk about integrity, it entails a lot of things. First, integrity is about character. Second, when you look at our country, the people, it is corrupt. It's corrupt, right? They are leaders who are corrupt. But when we choose leaders who have higher integrity, that means they are leaders who will deliver their promises that they told the electorates. They are leaders who will not be grilled by the EACC. So according to how we were voting here, I thought integrity is the best. And if I look at the voting system, integrity carries the day. So it's the best. Let us choose leaders of character. Let us choose leaders who will not be compromised or anything by money and leaders who will bring development to our nation.
Thank you very much. Yvonne, you had it yourself. Integrity according to this young man. Hawa ni jamaa ambao usione tu ankuja hapa kupoteza muda, wametoka kazini wakasema lazima watifue Kivumbi hapa mwanzo kabla ya kuelekea nyumbani. Kwa hivyo kura zitaendelea kupigwa na katika muda sio kwa mrefu tutakuwa tunazihesabu kujua mambo yako namna gani. Lakini Zubeida pia katika upande wa pili wa eneo hili la Kencom atakuwa anaendelea kuhoji wawili watatu ambao wako pamoja naye kuangalia mambo haya na kwenda namna gani. Zubeida, kwako.
Na shukrani sana. Lofty yuko kule kwenye kituo chetu cha kura, na kitu ambacho kimenifanya nikaangalia kwa umakinifu kura ambazo zinaendelezwa na Lofty Matambo ni kwamba zinaoana na zile ambazo zinaendelea kwenye mtandao wa kijamii, kwa sababu awali Lofty alikuwa ametueleza maadili ni kura 73, kabila 17, pesa 12, elimu 6. Tukiangalia mtandao wa Twitter tunaona maadili 74%, elimu 6%, kabila 16% na pesa 4%. Unaona kura hizo zinaenda sako kwa bako, nikana kwamba ziko sawa, zimepigwa katika kituo kimoja. Lakini tunapoangalia kile ambacho kimejadiliwa na wale wataalamu walie na Yvonne Okwara kule studioni, wameuliza swali ambalo ni nyeti. Wanauliza, je, wapiga kura ni waathiriwa au ni wahusika? Wao ni victims au ni accomplices? Tunapozungumza kuhusu swala hili kuhusiana na viongozi ambao tunawachagua, nyinyi mnaonaje?
Wapiga kura ni waathirika na pia ni wahusika. Maanake hao ndio wana place ile demand kwa mwanasiasa. Wanamwambia wewe usipotupa kitu, wewe sio mtu. Wanasema mtu ni kitu. Sasa hivyo wanamlazimisha mwanasiasa imbidi atoe either pesa 50, 100, 200, pesa ambayo kwa kweli hata wezi tumia kwa siku moja, the whole day, lakini watumia tu pengine wanunua kitu kimoja tu. Na pia upande ule mwingine ni waathirika. Manake wakisha mwanasiasa kisha wapa hii pesa, basi maendeleo ambayo wanatarajia hawapati. Manake huu mwanasiasa anachukulia kana kwamba alinunua ile kura. Manake hakupewa, ilibidi atoe pesa ili apigiwe kura. Kwa hivyo sasa ni upande mbili zote, ni waathirika na pia ni
Gideon, tulipoanza matangazo haya na hadi sasa mmekuwa mkiangazia historia yetu jinsi ilivyo na jinsi historia imetuleta mahali tulipo. Unapoangalia bado Wakenya wanaangalia kama ni chama kinabuniwa kwa misingi ya kabila letu. Unapoangalia upigaji kura, pia taratibu za kupiga kura, unaona unapigia mtu kwa sababu ni wa jamii yako na masuala kama hayo. Tunapoingia katika uchaguzi na hasa mkiwa viongozi wa vijana, mnaweza washauri vipi tubadilishe hali ilivyo kwa sasa ya upigaji kura humo nchini?
Na ukiangalia makosa kubwa ilitokezea pia pale kugawa kwa counties. Ukiangalia counties sana walijaribu kugawa counties kwa kulingana na kabila gani inaishi hapa, kabila gani inaishi pale. Hiyo pia sidhani kama ni kitu ambayo ni kitu tunaweza pata suluhisho kwa haraka, ila tunaweza endelea na mazungumzo ya kuwa kama wewe ni mpigaji kura, usipige kura kwa sababu ya ukabila. Angalia kupitie more than just ukabila. Uangalie uwezo wa kiongozi, uangalie pia manifesto gani yako nayo, uangalie pia mipango gani yako nayo ama ameweza kuiweka ili kubadilisha maisha ya wananchi pale nyumbani. Tusiangalie tu maneno ya swali moja tu peke yake. Ukiangalia pia ile swali ulikuwa umeulizia, vijana wengi ama watu wengi hupiga kura kwa sababu ya ukabila na sababu ya pesa. Kwa sababu mingi, umaskini iko Kenya.
Na tunatumai kwamba viongozi ambao watachaguliwa sasa wataweza kukabili umaskini ambao ni umewaathiri wengi, masuala ya elimu na pia miundo msingi kuboreshwa na mambo kama haya. Shukrani sana kwa kuwa nasi.
Asante sana.
Na nashukuru sana kwa muda wenu. Unajua watu wameshangaa, kwa hivyo Jubilee na NASA wanaweza keti katika meza moja na wazungumze mambo yanayomfaa mwananchi. Shukrani sana. Tumekuwa na viongozi wawili, Muriuki Ndwiga anawakilisha upande wa NASA na tumekuwa na Gideon Ketere anawakilisha mrengo wa Jubilee, na awali tulikuwa na Gathoni Ndung'u ambaye ni wakili. Mtazamaji, shukrani sana kwa kuandamana nasi kuanzia mwendo wa saa 12 hadi sasa. Nampisha Ivono Kwara Matole aweze kuendelea na mjadala ambao unaendelea studioni, na pia Lofty Matambo ataendelea na kura. Tukutane kesho kwenye jukwaa la KTN. Jina langu ni Zubeida Kome, kwa niaba ya wote nasema shukrani za dhati.
Thank you, Zubeida, for that. The conversation here is so robust. Before I introduce our election series, Quote My Vote, listen, are we idealistic? Is that what we were saying? Because remember, you were saying, we were having this discussion when Zubeida was speaking, is that in 2002, 2003, we had a lot of people who had great values, integrity. Remember, all these people from civil society, and they went in, and Martin, you're saying they were what, subsumed
they were
by
captured.
the system?
No, they were captured by the system.
State capture, was it?
My experience is that, again, it goes back to what we really are. It doesn't matter whether in the civil society, it doesn't matter whether in academia, it doesn't matter whether you are in the politics. At the end of the day, our issues are the same. That's why we can talk about corruption in parliament, we can talk about corruption in the judiciary, we can talk about
because there's also men of the cloth, men and women of the cloth who made it into parliament.
So what I'm struggling with my friend Galara here is that the more realistic we are, the more we accept where we are, the more likely we are going to find solutions.
So which is to say what? That we are all corrupt and that we all have a problem with values and therefore can't vote for anyone with values?
You know, we have so much problems with values, that's why we put it in the constitution, as if by putting it in Article 10, we would have solved it. No, I mean, you don't. Issues of morality are difficult to pass alone. Remember, the 10 Commandments are here. They are very clear. I was telling Malia that we have passed laws about robbery, about theft, but we still have these cases going on. So it's not about the passage of those laws. It's about whether we want to live the values that we are ascribing to. If we don't live them, let's not expect to get leaders.
I disagree quite a lot. First, the problem is in the values of the Kenyans, the values that are espoused in the state. And I think Alex had a very good illustration when he spoke about having a rotten barrel of apples and then throwing in a fresh apple. It will get rotten. Your problem isn't the apple that you have, is that barrel. You know,
so do we forget water because there is that?
2003.
Yeah.
What happened in 2003 is we fed in all these guys. And don't forget, today we privilege integrity. Lots of these people had suffered for the stance that they took. They had integrity, you know, in any way we could measure it. But we fed them into a rotten barrel. We put them in there. We did not fix the barrel.
Okay,
and so that is my point.
Okay,
and what I'm saying
so
is,
who cleans the system is the question I want to ask Alex.
Okay. I think it is a really, really complex task. Because the reason why I say it's complicated is because we have normalized these things. And as Martin says, that we need to be more realistic about where we are as a country. And the survey that we did in 2014, we worked with Ipsos Innovate through their RCA program, Research Clubs of Africa. They used the same survey structure in high schools. The results were exactly the same. These are kids who are teenagers.
Young people, yeah.
They bribe in their student elections. They bribe askaris, they bribe the cooks, they bribe teachers. So the whole thing, including examinations. So it starts from cradle. It starts from the cradle.
Their parents bribe to give them exams?
Absolutely. So we have a deep systemic social problem of an ethical nature. And I don't know, the churches are the same thing. So the question really is, the really emblematic people, the guys that we put out there, the politicians, just represent the worst of us.
Okay, so let me ask this because there is a campaign talking about fagia wote, which is what you're saying, take the barrel, throw it out with everything that's in it, sort of drain the swamp kind of conversation. So where are these leaders to come from if we're not the ones choosing the leaders that have the right education, the right integrity, that aren't corrupt, that aren't tribal? So where, pray tell, do we get these people?
Yvonne,
are they from Mars? Sure.
Let me give us a typical example. And I'm taking Nyeri.
Yeah.
Virtually all members of parliament in Nyeri were swept off by the
except
Jubilee
one.
wave.
Yeah.
Except
MCA
one.
is the same, except
MCAs,
one.
30 of them, except one survived. Are we saying that all those members of parliament were bad? Certainly not. But what were the dynamics that led
Hold that thought. We will answer that question when we come back from a break. We want to take a break right here. You're watching Kivumbi 2017. Oh my, what an interesting conversation. Remember, Zinzi and Hassan Juma will also be here to take a look at what is happening on social media as well. We're coming back with this conversation with my panel, as well as the introduction of our new election series. It's called Quote My Vote. We'll be telling you more on that. We'll be speaking to actually some people in Nyeri. We'll be getting their views. We had that as well. An interesting county. Kivumbi 2017. The great conversation here continues. Election issues. Is that possible or a mirage? Are we being too idealistic? We'll be right back.